Picture this. It's 2:47 a.m. on a freezing December night in 2016. I'm standing alone in SpaceX's Hawthorne factory, surrounded by twisted metal and shattered dreams. My hands are shaking, not from the cold, but from the weight of what just happened. 3 explosions, 3 failures, $300 million gone. Just like that. The silence in that massive warehouse was deafening. You could hear the hum of the fluorescent lights above, the distant sound of traffic on the 105 freeway, and the crushing weight of everyone's expectations crashing down on me. My phone had been buzzing non-stop for the past 4 hours. Investors, board members, reporters, all asking the same damn question. Elon, is this the end? Are you finally giving up on your crazy Mars dream? I looked at that phone, sitting there on the metal table next to pieces of what used to be our Falcon 9 rocket. For the first time in my life, I actually considered it. Maybe they were right. Maybe I was just some delusional tech billionaire who thought he could play with rockets. Tesla was hemorrhaging cash. We were 3 weeks away from bankruptcy. The Model 3 production was a disaster. SolarCity was drowning. And now this, our 3rd rocket explosion in 18 months. I picked up a piece of charred metal from the floor. It was supposed to be part of the engine that would take humanity to Mars. Instead, it was just expensive scrap metal. That's when something inside me broke. Not in a bad way, but like a dam bursting open. I realized I was at the most important crossroads of my entire life. Everything I'd ever worked for, everything I'd ever believed in, came down to this single moment. What happened next changed everything. I walked over to the window overlooking the factory floor. Down there, hundreds of my employees had worked tirelessly for months, believing in a vision that seemed increasingly impossible. How could I look them in the eye tomorrow? The weight of their trust felt heavier than any rocket we'd ever built. These weren't just employees. They were believers. Engineers who'd left prestigious jobs at Boeing and Lockheed Martin. Technicians who'd moved their families across the country, all because they believed in something bigger than themselves. I thought about Sarah, one of our lead engineers. She'd been working 80-hour weeks for the past 6 months. Just last week, she'd shown me pictures of her daughter's science fair project, a model rocket inspired by SpaceX. That little girl believed her mom was helping to put humans on Mars. How do you explain to a 7-year-old that sometimes dreams explode on the launch pad? My mind wandered to the early days, back when SpaceX was just a crazy idea. People called me insane. Elon's ego project, they said, a tech guy who thinks he can reinvent rocket science. The aerospace industry had been doing things the same way for 50 years. Who was I to think I could change it, but that's exactly why I had to try. Every great leap forward in human history came from someone who refused to accept that's just how things are done. The Wright brothers weren't trained pilots, they were bicycle mechanics. Steve Jobs wasn't a computer engineer, he was a college dropout with a vision. I pressed my palm against the cold glass of the window. My reflection stared back at me. Tired eyes, stubble, a man who looked like he'd been carrying the world on his shoulders. Because in a way, I had been. The future of human space exploration, sustainable energy, and maybe even our survival as a species, it all felt like it was resting on my shoulders. And tonight, those shoulders felt ready to break. I closed my eyes and suddenly I was 12 years old again, standing in my childhood bedroom in Pretoria, South Africa. The walls were covered with pictures of rockets, space shuttles, and distant galaxies. I had this old telescope that I'd saved up for months to buy, and every night I'd point it at the stars and dream. My father used to say I was wasting my time. Elon, you need to focus on practical things, he'd tell me. Space is for Americans and Russians, not for South African boys. But I knew he was wrong. I could feel it in my bones. Space wasn't just for superpowers, it was for humanity. And if humanity was going to survive, we needed to become a multi-planetary species. That dream had carried me through everything. Through the loneliness of being the weird kid who read encyclopedias for fun. Through the bullying at school. Through leaving everything I knew behind to come to America with nothing but a backpack and an impossible dream. I opened my eyes and looked around the factory again. This wasn't just a building, it was a monument to that 12-year-old boy's dream. Every bolt, every wire, every line of code represented years of sacrificing everything for the belief that humans belonged among the stars. But tonight, that dream felt further away than ever. I walked over to the memorial wall, photos of every SpaceX mission, successful or not. There was Falcon 1's first launch, a spectacular failure that taught us everything we needed to know about engine combustion. There was our first successful orbit, the moment we proved the doubters wrong. And there, In the corner was a photo that stopped me cold. It was from 2008, right after our fourth Falcon 1 attempt. I was standing next to the launch tower, covered in soot and sweat, but smiling. We'd just become the first private company to successfully orbit Earth. I remembered that feeling, pure euphoria mixed with relief. We'd nearly gone bankrupt building that rocket. I'd put my last $20 million into the company, not knowing if we'd ever see success. But we did it. Against all odds, we did it. That memory hit me like a punch to the gut, because I realized something. I'd been here before. Maybe not exactly here, but close enough. In 2008, both Tesla and SpaceX were on the brink of collapse. The financial crisis had dried up all our funding. We had enough money for maybe one more rocket launch and one more Tesla production run. If either failed, both companies would die. I remember calling my brother Kimball that night. "I think this might be it," I told him. "I think I might have finally bitten off more than I can chew." But Kimball said something that stuck with me. "Elon, you've never been motivated by easy. You've always been motivated by necessary." Necessary. That word echoed in my mind as I stood in that empty factory. Climate change wasn't slowing down because Tesla was struggling. The fact that humans were still confined to one planet wasn't changing because SpaceX had setbacks. The problems I was trying to solve didn't care about my personal failures. They were still necessary. I thought about my kids. What kind of world was I leaving for them? What kind of future was I giving them if I gave up now? Would they grow up on a planet choked by fossil fuels, forever trapped in Earth's gravity well, because their father didn't have the courage to keep trying? That thought made me angry, not at anyone else, but at myself. At the voice in my head that was telling me to quit, at the part of me that wanted to take the easy way out. I walked over to the workbench where our engineers had been analyzing the explosion. Scattered across the surface were printouts, charts, calculations. Even in failure, they were learning. Even in disaster, they were adapting. That's when I saw it. A small note written in the margin of one of the reports. It was Sarah's handwriting. "Failure is just data. Data is just another step toward success." My eyes welled up. Here I was, ready to give up, while my team was already figuring out how to fix the problem. I picked up that report and sat down in one of the metal chairs. As I read through the technical analysis, something remarkable started to emerge. The explosion wasn't random, it was educational. Every piece of debris told a story. Every scorch mark was a lesson. That's when I remembered the most important conversation of my life. It was with my grandfather, my mom's father, back when I was 15. He was a pilot who'd flown reconnaissance missions in World War II. He'd seen things that would break most men, but somehow he'd maintained this incredible optimism about humanity. "Elon," he told me one day as we sat on his porch, "I've seen human beings at their absolute worst. I've also seen them at their absolute best. And I'll tell you something, the best always comes when everything seems impossible." I asked him what he meant. "During the war," he said, "I watched engineers solve problems in days that had stumped scientists for decades. I saw ordinary people do extraordinary things because they had to, because the alternative was unacceptable." He leaned forward and looked me straight in the eye. "You have something special, grandson. You see problems that others can't see, and you refuse to accept that they can't be solved. Don't ever lose that. The world needs people who are too stubborn to accept impossible." Sitting in that factory, I realized I'd forgotten that lesson. I'd gotten so caught up in the failure that I'd stopped seeing the opportunity. This explosion wasn't the end of SpaceX. It was SpaceX becoming better. Every rocket that failed taught us something we couldn't learn any other way. The Wright brothers crashed dozens of gliders before they flew. Edison failed over 1,000 times before he invented the light bulb. But here's what they understood that I'd temporarily forgotten. Failure isn't the opposite of success. It's part of success. I stood up and walked over to the debris field. Instead of seeing destruction, I started seeing information. Instead of seeing the end, I started seeing the beginning. I grabbed a flashlight and started examining the wreckage more closely. Each piece told part of the story. The combustion chamber had failed at precisely 127.3 seconds into flight. The telemetry data showed an anomalous pressure spike right before the explosion. But instead of feeling defeated, I felt excited. This was a puzzle, and I'd always loved puzzles. I called Tom, our head of propulsion, even though it was nearly 4 a.m. He answered on the first ring. Engineers never really sleep when there's a problem to solve. "Tom," I'm at the factory looking at the debris. I think I know what happened. Elon. Jesus, what are you doing there at this hour? Having an epiphany. Get down here. Bring the thermal imaging data from the test fire last week. 30 minutes later, Tom arrived with coffee and a laptop full of data. We spread everything out on the floor and started connecting dots. The pressure spike, the thermal imaging, the metallurgy reports, it all started forming a picture. There, I said, pointing to a specific component, the LOX injector. It's not handling the pressure differential correctly at high thrust levels. Tom's eyes lit up. Holy shit, you're right, but it means we can fix it. Not just fix it, we can make it better than it ever was. For the next 2 hours, we sketched out solutions. New materials, different geometries, improved cooling systems. What started as our worst failure was becoming our greatest breakthrough. That's when it hit me. This was exactly how progress worked. You push the boundaries until something breaks, then you learn from what broke and push even further. I thought about Tesla's early days. Our first Roadster caught fire during testing. Instead of seeing it as a disaster, we used it to develop the safest battery system in the automotive industry. I thought about the internet companies I'd started. PayPal was nearly killed by fraud in our early days. Instead of giving up, we developed the most sophisticated fraud detection system in the world, pattern recognition. That was the key. Every setback contained the seeds of the next breakthrough. By 6 a.m., Tom and I had filled 3 whiteboards with calculations and design improvements. The LOX injector problem had led us to rethink the entire engine architecture. We weren't just fixing a failure, we were revolutionizing rocket propulsion. You know what this means? Tom said, stepping back from the whiteboard. Tell me. This engine design could increase our payload capacity by 23%. It could cut launch costs by another 40%. Elon, this failure might have just made Mars colonization economically viable. I felt something I hadn't felt in months. Pure, electric excitement. The kind of feeling you get when you realize you're on the verge of changing everything. I walked back to the window and looked out at the sunrise painting the Los Angeles sky orange and pink. Somewhere out there, beyond Earth's atmosphere, Mars was waiting. Not just for me, not just for SpaceX, but for humanity. I thought about the first humans who would set foot on Martian soil. They'd probably be born in the next decade. Some kid who was playing with toy rockets right now would grow up to plant the first flag on another planet. But only if we kept pushing forward, only if we refused to let failure stop us. I pulled out my phone and started typing a message to the entire SpaceX team. Team, last night we experienced our most valuable failure yet. I know that sounds crazy, but by this afternoon, you'll understand why. We're not just getting back up, we're leaping forward. The road to Mars just got shorter. I paused before hitting send. Was I being too optimistic? Was I setting everyone up for disappointment? Then I remembered something Steve Jobs once told me. Innovation distinguishes between a leader and a follower. Leaders don't just react to failure, they transform it into fuel for the next breakthrough. I hit send. Within minutes, my phone was buzzing with responses. Engineers offering to come in early. Technicians volunteering for weekend shifts, the entire team rallying around not just recovery, but revolution. That's when I realized the most important thing. I wasn't in this alone. By 8 a.m., the factory was buzzing with activity. Word had spread about our breakthrough, and people were showing up early, excited to be part of the solution. Sarah arrived with her entire engineering team and a box of donuts. Heard you had a long night, boss. Figured you could use some sugar and some backup. Watching my team dive into the technical challenges, I realized something profound. This wasn't just about me and my dreams anymore. Somewhere along the way, my impossible vision had become our impossible vision. These people weren't just working for a paycheck, they were working for something bigger than themselves. They were working for a future where their children might live on multiple planets, where clean energy wasn't just a dream, but a reality. I thought about the skeptics who'd been calling all morning, the investors who were panicking, the media outlets preparing to write SpaceX's obituary. They all saw the explosion as an ending. But looking around that factory, all I saw were beginnings. Jessica, one of our youngest engineers, walked up to me with a new design for the combustion chamber. She was 24 years old, fresh out of MIT, and she just solved a problem that had stumped aerospace engineers for decades. "Mr. Musk," she said, "I think I found a way to make the engine not just more reliable, but more powerful." I looked at her design. It was brilliant, elegant, revolutionary. "Jessica, How long have you been working on this? Since about 3 a.m. I couldn't sleep after the explosion, so I started thinking about alternative approaches. That's when it hit me. This failure hadn't just taught us technical lessons, it had revealed the true character of our team. When things got tough, they didn't run away. They ran toward the problem. I called everyone together for an impromptu meeting. About 200 people gathered in the main assembly area, surrounded by rockets in various stages of completion. 6 months ago, I told them, people said we were crazy for trying to land rockets back on Earth. Last night, we proved them wrong, for the 7th time in a row. This morning, people are saying we're finished because of one explosion. 6 months from now, we're going to prove them wrong again. The applause was deafening. Standing in front of my team that morning, I made a promise that would define the next chapter of SpaceX, and maybe human history. I'm going to tell you something that's going to sound impossible, I said. Within 18 months, we're not just going to fix this engine, we're going to make it so reliable, so powerful, that we'll launch our first crewed mission to the International Space Station. The room went silent. That timeline was aggressive even by SpaceX standards. And within 5 years, I continued, we're going to put the first SpaceX crew on the surface of Mars. Now people were shifting uncomfortably. I could see the doubt in some faces, the fear in others. I know it sounds crazy, I know it sounds impossible, but you know what? So did landing a rocket on a floating platform in the middle of the ocean. So did making electric cars that people actually wanted to buy. So did creating a payment system that revolutionized online commerce. I paused and looked around the room. These weren't just employees anymore. They were co-conspirators in the biggest adventure in human history. The only difference between impossible and inevitable is refusing to give up. Last night, I almost gave up. I almost let the weight of expectations and the fear of failure convince me to quit. I pointed to the debris field behind me. But that explosion didn't destroy our dream. It refined it. It showed us exactly what we need to fix. It gave us the data we need to succeed. Tom stepped forward. What do you need from us, Elon? I need you to be unreasonable. I need you to reject the limitations that other people accept. I need you to remember that we're not just building rockets, we're building the future. The energy in that room was electric. I could see people standing straighter, eyes brighter, ready to attempt the impossible. One more thing, I said. When we succeed, and we will succeed, remember this moment. Remember that our greatest breakthrough came right after our most devastating failure. Remember that the path to Mars started with an explosion in a warehouse in Hawthorne, California. The applause lasted 5 minutes, but more importantly, I could see something in their faces that I hadn't seen in months. Absolute, unwavering belief. 18 months later, we launched our first crewed mission to the ISS. 5 years later, we landed on Mars. But the real victory happened that night in the factory, when we chose to transform failure into fuel for success. Looking back, I realized that explosion was the best thing that could have happened to us. Not because we wanted to fail, but because it forced us to evolve. It forced us to become better, stronger, more innovative than we ever imagined possible. Every great achievement in human history has followed the same pattern. Someone attempts something impossible, fails spectacularly, learns from that failure, and tries again. The Wright brothers, Edison, Einstein, Jobs, they all understood that failure isn't the enemy of success. It's the raw material of success. Today, when young entrepreneurs ask me for advice, I tell them about that night. I tell them that your biggest breakthrough will come right after your most devastating setback. The key is not avoiding failure, it's learning to see failure as information, as education, as fuel for your next attempt. The universe doesn't care about your timeline, it doesn't care about your comfort level, but it rewards persistence. It rewards the people who are too stubborn to accept that something can't be done. Mars didn't get closer to Earth because we succeeded. We got closer to Mars because we refused to let failure stop us from trying. So here's my challenge to you. What's your Mars? What's the impossible thing you've been afraid to attempt because you might fail? What's the dream you've been putting off because the risk seems too great? Remember, every rocket that reaches the stars is built on the lessons learned from rockets that exploded on the pad. Every breakthrough is built on the foundation of previous breakdowns. Your failures aren't stopping you from reaching your dreams. They're preparing you for them. The question isn't whether you'll fail. The question is what you'll do with that failure when it comes. Will you let it stop you, or will you let it teach you? The choice is yours, but choose quickly. The future is waiting, and it won't wait forever. The night that almost broke me became the night that made me unstoppable. And that same transformation is available to you right now if you're willing to see failure as your teacher instead of your enemy.